Hello everybody, welcome. It's Tuesday. How did it get to be Tuesday? I don't know where the days are going. I really don't know where the days are going. But here we are again for another thought-provoking thought, I hope. And I'm going to talk about one of my favourite topics whenever I read the scriptures and think about things in the Bible. I've studied the scriptures, probably many of you know, for many, many years. And for quite a few of those years when I was up in Croydon, I used to take and teach classes in the evenings to people in the church that I belong to about how to make sense of the Bible, how to understand the Old Testament history, how to fit the prophets in with the kings, and to know what order things happened in, and how to understand better what's written in the Old Testament. Because if you understand the history and the changes in the society in which things happened, you understand far better the things that are written. So one of the things that I would always be saying to people is, whenever you're reading a story that involves geography, look at a map. I mean, I know we're not travelling very much at the moment, any of us, but it's good to look at a map. And we are so fortunate these days. We have the internet. We can just go to the internet and ask it questions of maps, or see a map. But back in the days when I was studying, the maps I had were the maps at the back of my Bible, or in a Bible commentary book, or I've got several books that are very good about the background to the Bible. Now you may say, what has that got to do with what we're thinking about, as we're thinking about the period between when Jesus ascended to when the coming of the Holy Spirit happened, which was 10 days. Here we are, we're on the Tuesday in the middle of that 10 days. Thursday marked our remembrance of Ascension Day. It's not anywhere likely to be the day that it actually happened, but it's the day in our year when the church remembers that particular event. And 10 days later, next Sunday, is the day of Pentecost. And we've been thinking about what the disciples did during that time. But I'm actually going to think about today what happened between the resurrection, which was 40 days earlier than the ascension, and the day of Pentecost, which totaled 50 days. And it is astonishing to me, it really is astonishing to me, that there was no upheaval or hoo-ha or marching of soldiers rounding up all the disciples and everything, because then they were going to say that the disciples had stolen the body when people talked about his resurrection. But that doesn't... How can a thing that is so earth-shakingly strange, like someone coming back from the dead, not be talked about? There's an incredible silence. Yes, Jesus kept appearing to his disciples, but he didn't appear to anybody else, and they did not talk publicly about it. There's no evidence that anybody outside of the disciple group knew that Jesus was alive. It's really strange to me. But think about it, 50 days. And when we have had coming up for 70 days since the lockdown started. Well, 60, I've lost count. But you couldn't miss it, could you? But nobody. So what did the disciples do? What did the followers of Jesus do in that time? We get hints, we know things. We know, for example, at the end of John's Gospel, all the appearances of Jesus that are recorded in the Gospels, apart from the appearance to the two men who were walking on the road to Emmaus. And do look at a map and see where Emmaus is, because it's quite a distance from Jerusalem. They walked there, met with Jesus, realised who he was, and then walked all the way back to Jerusalem. You have to think about the culture. They had no buses or bicycles or horses. Not the people, not the ordinary person. Nobody had anything to ride except a donkey, and it was rare to ride a donkey. You used a donkey to carry things. You didn't ride a donkey very often at all in those days. Everyone walked everywhere. There were no planes. There was no telephone. There were letters written. We know that. Anyway, but so we had the men, the two people, might have been a man and a woman, but two people who walked to Emmaus and back. That's at the end of Luke. And the only other thing is, they were in Jerusalem when Jesus met with them. And then, in John 20, they were up on the Lake of Galilee, having a fishing trip. Now, the Lake of Galilee is, if you look at your map, 70 miles north of Jerusalem. That is a 3-day journey. If you walk through Samaria, the relationships between the Jews and the Samaritans were a bit like the relationship between Jews and Arabs today. It was difficult to walk through Samaria. Jesus did walk through Samaria in John 4, but they may have or they may not have. It was a minimum of 3 days' journey and 5 days' journey if you went round Samaria and didn't walk through. And then, of course, it's the same distance coming back. So they went up there, some of them, not all, we don't know how many of them, but at least 8 of them went up there, had a fishing trip. And, of course, Peter, James and John, and the disciples that were fishermen, all had their home base in Capernaum, on the shores of that lake, 70 miles north. And much of the ministry of Jesus happened round the Sea of Galilee, or on the sea, or the other side of the sea. Not in Jerusalem at all. So we have to think that they walked all the way up there, and as they walked, I'm sure they told people who were followers of Jesus and who had heard about the crucifixion, they told them. And slowly, over that period of time, people, and when Jesus ascended, people began to gather in Jerusalem, because by the time the day of Pentecost comes, there are 120 people gathered in the upper room where Jesus and his disciples had the Last Supper. Now, that makes it quite a big room. 120 people gathered in that room on the day of Pentecost. And when Jesus ascended, he said to them, stay in Jerusalem until the promise maybe will come. Maybe they went back up to Capernaum to avoid the authorities coming to get them. Maybe that was their decision, that they all moved back up north, out of the way, and kept quiet while Jesus while Jesus came and went amongst them. I don't know, but that's highly likely. And that Jesus brought them back to the Mount of Olives, where he ascended, and then told them to stay in Jerusalem until the Spirit came. So for those last 10 days, they were in Jerusalem. But whenever you're reading a story that involves places, different places, do take the time to look at a map and think about the distances, think about the travel that was needed, think about, I often think about what were the conversations that went on as they walked for days to get from one place to another. That's my thought for the day. I'll see you tomorrow.